Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Chancellor has stated that many things will look similar the day after Britain leaves the EU in March 2019. Philip Hammond said there's broad agreement in Cabinet that there should be a transition period of up to 3 years after Brexit to smooth the process, but that it should be finished before the next general election in 2022. Well, let's speak now to our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, who's at Westminster for us. John.
Well, many believed that Philip Hammond was a candidate for the sack if Theresa May had won big in the June election. Now he's a pivotal figure. No one's gone further than he has in setting out government thinking on Brexit. Free trade with the EU up to and after Brexit, we knew ministers wanted that. But now look, he said there's broad agreement, at least in principle, among senior ministers, including hardline Brexiteers, that British borders should remain open to all EU citizens for years to come.
The overriding concern as we leave the EU, and the job will be done on the 29th of March 2019, the overriding concern is to make sure that we go through this process in a way that avoids disruptive cliff edges for business and for individual citizens.
Trouble is, it's not that simple. Nothing about Brexit is. The European Union will want future trade disputes to be settled by the EU's own Court of Justice. Philip Hammond has floated the idea of a possible new special court. And I'm told that some in government believe that Britain might agree to some limited role for the EU's own Court of Justice in the future, though you won't see government ministers conceding that point now. When it comes to EU trade, beyond British trade outside the European Union, Brussels says there can be no negotiation, certainly no agreement, until after Brexit and any transition. Ministers want to get on with it. Whether you love Brexit or whether it keeps you awake at night, no one, absolutely no one, believes it's going to be easy.
John, thank you. John Pienaar there.
Post-Brexit Britain could resemble pre-Brexit Britain for a while, and there could be a transitional period of up to 3 years, the Chancellor Philip Hammond has suggested. He said his cabinet colleagues had agreed that to cushion the impact of Brexit in March 2019, the government could seek a transitional period which could last until 2022.
I think what the British public wants to see on the first day after we leave is business pretty much as usual. The overriding concern is to make sure that we go through this process in a way that avoids disruptive cliff edges for business and for individual citizens.
Since we joined the EU, we've enjoyed pretty much unfettered air travel to European Union destinations, give or take a strike or a storm or two. In fact, the Office of National Statistics reported that last year there was a total record of 14.7 million visits to Spain alone by UK residents. The vast majority of these were for holidays. But when we exit the EU, if we leave the European industry and safety bodies, as seems to be the plan, we may be in for a very bumpy ride. Here's our business editor, Helen Thomas.
For decades, we've been taking flight to an ever-increasing number of destinations. But as we migrate towards Brexit, there are warnings of turbulence ahead. If we're not careful, could we find ourselves, well, flightless?
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here.
The boss of Ryanair has been vocal about the risks to our getaways.
There is a real prospect, and we need to deal with this, that there is going to be no flights between the UK and Europe for a period of weeks, months beyond March 2019.
He wants the UK to stay in Europe's existing Open Skies Agreement that allows planes to fly freely. He says we're running out of time to negotiate an alternative. The industry that makes the planes has its worries too. Aeromet manufactures 45,000 fuel connectors for Airbus each year. From here in Rochester, they go to Wales to become part of Wings, then on to Toulouse, where the planes are assembled.
The aerospace industry has some familiar concerns.
It wants hassle-free trade with no tariffs or delays for complex international supply chains. But there is a more fundamental problem. The safety regime that underpins everything from parts to planes to pilots to maintenance is European, and that has the potential to ground the industry. That safety regime is the work of the European Aviation Safety Agency. The boss of the UK's aerospace industry body says it's vital to stay in it.
We are very clear that we wish to remain a member of the European Aviation Safety Agency, and we don't believe that there is a viable alternative that can be up and running in a reasonable period of time.
ADS reckons it could take 5 to 10 years and 300 extra staff to equip the UK's Civil Aviation Authority to take over. And we may still need a transition period where we stay very close to the EU indeed.
When we cease to be an EU member, we need to have in place a whole new set of international agreements. So for us, the transition period is important, and it's important that during that period we remain an EU member. Really, it's about providing our international colleagues, particularly the US, with confidence that the new regulatory regime that we are going to operate, is capable of meeting the high safety and security standards that they require. The challenge is we don't know what that is going to look like.
So how complicated is it to secure our freedom to fly? Countries like Norway or Switzerland are part of the European Safety Agency, but outside the EU. But they also have bilateral agreements with places like the US. Without a safety regime that's recognised by the rest of the world, the UK could find itself left on the ground.
This isn't just general griping about the cost and disruption of Brexit. It's a very specific problem. And it's not one that can be solved just by the UK and Europe. It requires input from regulators around the world. By some estimates, that work could take 18 months to make sure that we can keep flying after departure from the EU. And that's even if we stay part of the European safety body. The clock is most definitely ticking.
The head of America's Federal Aviation Administration said in June that discussions with the UK government had started, but he added they were complicated and time-consuming by their very nature. And he warned,
"It is important to keep these time constraints in mind and to not get sidetracked into an uncomfortable situation in which a missed deadline results in an interruption of service."
Sticking with the European regulator should make these conversations simpler. But staying a member of the European Safety Agency may not fly politically.
The main issue is the financial contribution that would still need to be made within and into a European establishment. There's also the issue of oversight of the EASA framework and the rules, which currently sits with other European institutions and predominantly the ECJ.
This is where aerospace's problems start to sound familiar again. An important EU body with European Court of Justice oversight, a respected European rulebook that actually UK expertise has played a substantial part in devising, and a deadline to figure out what might or could take its place.
If we don't have a transition arrangement, and if we aren't a member of the EU as part of that transition arrangement, then we have chaos, because we don't have a system to ensure that our products are safe and secure to fly, and a regime that is acknowledged around the world.
For now, the industry is in limbo, in the departure lounge, destination unknown.
Helen Thomas. Well, I'm joined now from Liverpool by the Conservative MEP Jacqueline Foster, and here in the studio by the aviation economist Peter Morris. Good evening to you both. Jacqueline Foster, how can we be part of the open skies regime after we exit the EU when it's overseen by the European Court of Justice. And Theresa May's made it absolutely clear that she doesn't want to be encumbered by any ruling from the European Court of Justice.
Well, I think there's a bit of confusion there. There's two separate issues here. Open skies are service agreements. And what the piece was about was twofold. It was about the role of the European Aviation Safety Agency and how we comply with the rules that are laid down there when we certify the goods from the aerospace manufacturers. And open skies, where we're looking at the airlines, is about the arrangements that we will have with third countries, clearly for traffic rights to fly from the UK both into Europe and obviously to other countries around the world. So
yes,
they're two separate
issues. Separate things, but on the question of open skies are governed by the European Court of Justice. So therefore, we're in a situation where Theresa May has said that we will not be involved in the European Court of Justice, and you have to abide by that to be part of the open skies policy.
Well, no, I think you're wrong here. We're talking about service agreements, and the European Court of Justice, the reference to European Court of Justice, is where we're actually talking about compliance to the European Aviation Safety Agency. The Safety Agency does not deal with their service agreements and open skies.
Well, there's two different things.
It's a completely separate body. That's the safety body.
Yes, absolutely. The European Aviation Safety Agency is one thing, but the whole open skies policy, is it your understanding that it actually comes under the ECJ?
Well, I think I take everything back to the customer, and the customer needs safe aviation, and the customer needs competitive aviation and the dynamic growth of networks in Europe, which is what 40 years of being involved in Europe has actually done, brought together those two elements so that they're not separate items at all.
Is it your understanding that then we will be part of open skies after we exit the EU?
If there was a plan, I'd be delighted to be involved in it. Certainly, post-election, it appears the Department for Transport has largely closed down communication with organisations like IATA and ERAA in order to have discussions about where are you going. The only doors that are open for discussion appear to be the doors in Brussels.
Well, on the question of the European Aviation Safety Agency, we will not automatically be a member of that after the EU exit. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding. And it's the understanding of the airlines as well. If you look at the moment...
It's in everybody's interest, surely,
I've
in
got
Europe.
to challenge some of the points he's raising.
Let me just put this to them. It's in everybody's interest, though, to carry on as openly and tariff-free as possible, because there's lots of other European countries want that to happen. So it's not a case of them wanting to lock us out.
Well, basically, we've had 260 million journeys last year, for example, that depend on this freedom and liberalisation, and that at the same time, you've got to recognise that the number of seats that the UK has in Europe are around 12% of the total. So there's 88% can get on with its business.
So can I just put it to you then, Jacqueline Foster, that we are not automatically going to be part of the European Aviation Safety Agency? We're simply not.
Well, I disagree. We will remain part of the European Aviation Safety Agency because we're not looking to form some other agency. There are other countries who are part of that agency and compliant with it, who are not members of the European Union. And the fact that we if I can finish, and the fact that we manufacture the goods here, for example, the wings for Airbus, Rolls-Royce engines, there's not going to be a tariff issue either, and those goods will continue to be certified in the European Aviation Safety Agency. When we come to the open skies or the air traffic agreements, I'm afraid your other guest is extremely negative because what we clearly need to do, because we won't be part of the EU in terms of an open skies agreement, we then need to have an arrangement, an air service agreement, which is UK-EU, and then we will revert back to bilaterals when we're looking, for example, at the United States, or where we've been part of an open skies agreement. We've had bilateral and multilateral agreements since 1944 under the Chicago Convention, and therefore, you know, with political will, and there is a lot of discussion, I have to take on board and challenge the comments your other guest has said, because clearly I'm not in the studio with you. Discussions have been taking place with people like me, I'm the transport spokesman, I specialise in this area in Brussels. The Commission wants smooth transition, we politicians want a smooth transition, the ministers want a smooth transition, I'm talking to the Americans and everybody.
Can I just put this very briefly back to my guest in the studio here in London? Speed is of the essence, presumably.
Okay. Well, the airlines are voting with their feet. If you look in the last week, EasyJet has taken off the UK AOC 100+ aeroplanes and put them in an AOC in Austria. They're not waiting for government decisions. They're deciding to move their business to Europe.
Thank you both very much indeed.